While the liberal news media hunts for evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, the public record shows that Democrats have willfully used Moscow disinformation to influence the presidential election against Donald Trump and attack his administration. The disinformation came in the form of a Russian-fed dossier written by former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele. It contains a series of unverified criminal charges against Mr. Trump's campaign aides, such as coordinating Moscow's hacking of Democratic Party computers. Some Democrats have widely circulated the discredited information. Mr. Steele was paid by the Democrat-funded opposition research firm Fusion GPS with money from a Hillary Clinton backer. Fusion GPS distributed the dossier among Democrats and journalists. The information fell into the hands of the FBI, which used it in part to investigate Mr. Trump's campaign aides. Mr. Steele makes clear that his unproven charges came almost exclusively from sources linked to the Kremlin and Russian President Vladimir Putin. He identified his sources as a senior Russian foreign ministry figure, a former top-level Russian intelligence officer active inside the Kremlin, a senior Kremlin official and a senior Russian government official. The same Democrats who have condemned Russia's election interference by applying fake news and hacking email servers have quoted freely from the Steele anti-Trump memos derived from creatures of the Kremlin. In other words, there is public evidence of significant, indirect collusion between Democrats and Russian disinformation, a Trump supporter said. If anyone colluded with the Russians, it was the Democrats, said a former Trump campaign advisor who asked not to be identified because of the pending investigations. After all, they've routinely shopped around false claims from the debunked Steele dossier, which listed sources including senior Kremlin officials. If anyone should be investigated in Washington, it ought to be Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell, Mark Warner and their staffers. That is a reference to Representative Adam B. Schiff of California, the top Democrat on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Senator Mark R. Warner, Virginia Democrat and Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and Representative Eric Swalwell, a California Democrat on the House Intelligence Panel. By his own admission, Mr. Steele's work has proved unreliable. As first reported by the Washington Times on April 25, Mr. Steele filed a document in a sealed court case in London acknowledging that a major dossier charge about hacking Democrats' computers was unverified. The entire dossier never should have been made public and Fusion GPS should not have passed it around, Mr. Steele said in a filing defending himself against a libel charge. About Carter Page. Other dossier targets vehemently deny the dirt thrown by the Kremlin sources. Mr. Steele's Russian sources accused Mr. Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, of attending a meeting with Russian agents in Prague to cover up their role in Moscow's hacking. Mr. Cohen has said he has never been to Prague and was in California at the time. One of the main targets of Mr. Steele's Russian sources is Carter Page, who lived and worked in Moscow as a Merrill Lynch investor. He had loose ties to the Trump campaign as a foreign policy advisor and surrogate. Mr. Steele's Russian sources accused Mr. Page of a series of crimes, teaming up with former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort to help Russia hack Democratic computers, meeting in Moscow with two Putin cronies to plot against Mrs. Clinton and working out a shady brokerage deal with a Russian oligarch. Mr. Page told the Washington Times that he has never met Mr. Manafort, knew nothing about Russian hacking when it was happening, never met the two Russians named by Mr. Steele and never completed the supposed investment deal. The dossier accusations against Mr. Page surfaced during the campaign in a Yahoo News story, citing not Mr. Steele but intelligence sources. It then went out on the U.S. government's Voice of America. In the meantime, the Clinton campaign used the Yahoo story to attack Mr. Trump. Hillary for America's statement on bombshell report about Trump aides chilling ties to Kremlin, blared the Clinton campaign's September 23 press release. Since the dossier was circulated widely among Democrats, Mr. Carter said, he believes the Clinton team possessed it and relied on it based on what some of Mrs. Clinton's surrogates said publicly.